Good morning, everyone. This is Doug McCall, Canadian Association for School Health and also coordinator for the International School Health Network. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this, I think it's the second or third session of our series of webinars and web meetings on substance abuse prevention in schools. We're very pleased to be welcoming a panel of people from around the world to the session, and also pleased to note that we now have 55 people who have joined this conversation and who are following these sessions either live today or through the recordings and through our online discussions using a Wikipedia-style website. So we're really pleased that this series of conversations is moving forward. Also would like to take this chance to thank Health Canada, our funder, and our partner, the Council on Drug Abuse in Canada, who with our association, our Canadian and international associations, are organizing this series of webinars as part of a national project funded by Health Canada from the Canadian Drug Strategy. So I'm very pleased to be welcoming our panel to the session, and we'll be moving forward. Our goal in this session is to look at the youth development generally, and more specifically the role that youth workers or youth facilitators can play in facilitating youth development as well as in preventing substance abuse. And so we have a panel of 3 people speaking, and then I've also asked another person, Joanne McQuiggan, to begin the conversation after the panel by being a bit of a discussant. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panel, which includes Peter Scales from the Search Institute. Those of you who have done any reading on youth development and asset development will know about the Search Institute's excellent work. Peter is a developmental psychologist and researcher and speaker who is recognized as one of the world's foremost authorities on positive development of children and youth. He has become the world's leading researcher on the role of developmental assets in the lives of children and youth, and his special expertise is on the development of healthy families, schools, and communities. We also have another excellent contributor, Julie Stevens, whose day job, who's just reaching retirement at the end of the month, but Julie has been working with SAMHSA as a training and technical specialist in their Southwest resource team in Texas. And as a volunteer, Julie has been very active within the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium, which sets international standards for competency-based certification programs around the world. And so that network has been part of the program that the Council on Drug Abuse has been using in schools, and has trained what the Council on Drug Abuse calls their CODA-trained certified educators. Leslie White, who was going to be our third panelist, is the Executive Director on the Council of Drug Abuse. The Council is a Canadian charity incorporated in 1969, and Leslie and I've talked about this actually when I first started this work in school-based school-based promotion. The CODA was one of the first groups that we worked with way back when, and that's going back a couple of decades. So CODA has been around a long time in the Canadian scene and is well recognized for their excellent program that goes into schools. As part of that work, CODA and CASH and others have been funded to adapt that program for Northern and Aboriginal communities in 3 jurisdictions in Canada. And this substance abuse, this webinar is part of an attempt to have a series of conversations about better practices in substance abuse, trying to look at some of the elements that make up the CODA program, but also generalizing to look at those better practices both in the Canadian context as well as other contexts. I'm very pleased that we're going to be expanding this conversation to include many from around the world as part of an ongoing series of substance abuse prevention conversations. Our next session is coming up very soon on the 29th, which will look at instruction, and we have some excellent speakers on that. And a little bit later on, we're going to be hearing from, for example, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has done some really good work on parent participation, and so one of their staff members will be joining us and talking about the work that they've been doing. As those of you who know me know that I like to get to the nuts and bolts of programs, and and to try to drill down so it becomes more feasible and more practical for schools. So we'll be trying to do that as much as possible in this session and in subsequent conversations, I hope, online. Also, those of you who have been on these sessions before know that we're using this webinar technology, web meeting technology. We've actually been a bit of a pioneer on this. We started doing it as far back as 2005, but we're trying to go beyond the presentation, trying to get more into conversations and discussions. And so I'm encouraging all of us to jump in and to respond and to make comments both in this session or in the Wikipedia-style website that we've started to develop as a support mechanism. We're also trying to encourage people to share information as part of this project. We've been funded to do a regular update on the research and news about substance abuse prevention in schools, and so if you follow some of the links from the session description, you'll end up looking at some of our community of practice pages where we have monthly reports on the latest research and news. And if you're on Twitter these days, it also has a kind of a Twitter account where we do a number of clippings. So we're trying to use the web in a diverse way to be able to carry on a conversation about these things. So looking forward to the session. So our panel will be starting up, as I said earlier. As you're listening, and if you come to a question, please type it into the chat box. I'll go back to those questions or comments and read them out after the three presenters have made their remarks and after Joanne has had a chance to comment, and then we'll open it up for discussion there. And so Peter, if you wanted to start us out with a presentation about youth development in general, Julie will talk about the skill sets for youth facilitators, and then Leslie and perhaps Seth will also join us in terms of some of the things that they're learning in their work here in Canada. So Peter, I'll just move you to that first page of your presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Doug. I'm glad to be with all of you this morning, at least morning in my time zone. And wanted to give you a few minutes of background on the research on positive youth development approaches, setting the stage for more of the nuts and bolts that Doug alluded to that will come from our other panelists. Search Institute, we've been conducting research on positive youth development for more than 50 years before the jargon PYD term was coined. So we have conducted surveys now with about 3.5 million youth around the world to come to some of the conclusions that I'll share with you in this presentation. What we want to focus on today is what positive youth development strategies do that distinguishes those approaches from traditional approaches to preventing at-risk behavior, preventing problems among young people. And I should say at the outset that this is not an either-or situation. Young people do not need either prevention approaches or positive youth development approaches, but a both-and situation. Positive youth development approaches lay the groundwork by working with all youth, not only those who are already identified as at risk, for building the responsible behavior, healthy behavior, productivity, caring attitudes, and so forth that we hope to instill in all young people. So it's a universal approach that actually strengthens the focus on prevention of ATOD, prevention of school failure, prevention of violence and criminal behavior. So these are not antagonistic approaches, but complementary approaches. PYD strategies really focus on 5 areas. First and foremost is building positive relationships between young people and adults, and between young people and their peers. And not so coincidentally, between young people and their institutions writ large, which are primarily in the form of relationships with adults, but also sometimes of a more symbolic nature, such as caring about the school they go to. It's driven by the relationships, but it's also driven by higher order representations in the child's mind, what that school represents, what that religious congregation represents, what that youth organization represents to him or her. So positive relationships, providing opportunities. Opportunities for skill development, opportunities for service, opportunities to identify and explore one's talents, or what we call young people's sparks, the kind of intrinsic internal light that shows them the way to go in life, that really is the expression of their self to the outside world, whether it's in the arts or athletics or mathematics or writing poetry or helping others. Everyone has a spark, and we want to provide youth opportunities to find what that spark is that can help them contribute to the world. Developing skills, social competencies, reasoning skills, problem-solving skills, a whole variety of decision-making skills and so forth that are quite familiar to those in the substance abuse prevention field. Promoting positive values, values that include caring, a sense of responsibility, integrity, values of equality and social justice, and shaping positive self-perceptions of young people. This includes things like self-esteem, but we don't focus particularly on self-esteem because a lot of people who do bad things actually think highly of themselves. So that's kind of a false goal to be pursuing by itself. But positive self-perceptions in the sense of a combination of worthiness, self-worthiness, and the sense of self-efficacy in being able to make things happen in the world, however small, that are valued by oneself and valued by one's society, one's family, one's neighborhood, one's larger society. Those kinds of self-perceptions, the perception that one has a hopeful future, regardless of the current status of one's life. What the research says, and now we've really, since positive youth development approaches began to really take root a couple of decades ago, we have just thousands of studies at this point that show us that those kinds of nutrients, those 5 kinds of strategies, focuses that we have in positive youth development, have a cumulative effect. Just like risk factors have a cumulative effect. The more risk factors young people are exposed to, the more likely they are to engage in risk behavior. We've known that for years. The same is true of positive aspects of life. Positive nutrients are what we call developmental assets. They too have a cumulative effect. The more of them you have, the better. Research has shown us that ecologies can be changed. We can change the school, we can change families, we can change communities. We can change the settings that young people are in to make them more asset building, nutrient providing. And ecologies have cumulative effects themselves. That across the total environment that young people live in, the more assets they experience across that environment, the better. That is, assets or nutrients experienced in the family are obviously helpful, but when a young person also experiences a high number of assets in their schools, in their communities, this has what we call a horizontal pile-up across their environment that is very positive. Youth and context influence each other, students in schools. Children change their parents, just as parents change their children. So the influence is bidirectional, and that's very important when we think about opportunities. because the more young people are given opportunities intentionally to contribute to the settings they're in, the more likely they are to engage in positive behaviors instead of destructive, risk-taking behaviors. And finally, clusters of specific nutrients or assets matter for specific outcomes. There's a lot of similarity, for example, between some of the assets that matter for substance abuse prevention and that matter for doing well in school, but some assets that are different. There's a higher accent in substance abuse prevention on the importance of positive influence from peers. But the importance of social skills and decision-making skills, social competencies, is high in predicting both avoidance of ATOD and also success in school. So there are clusters. Not only do large amounts of assets matter, but clusters of specific assets matter for specific outcomes. The pile-up effect that I've alluded to is what results from trying to simultaneously impact multiple aspects of young people's lives. In multiple contexts, family, school, community, and the peer group, and addressing multiple aspects of development: physical, cognitive, social, emotional, moral, and spiritual. When we can do this, when we can have simultaneous context impact and simultaneous impact on different dimensions of development, we really ratchet up the likelihood that our interventions are going to have an impact. Now, developmental assets, the 40 developmental assets, are a specific expression of positive youth development theory that we've just talked about. We introduced the developmental assets in 1990, and they were based on extensive research at the time, looking at those elements of young people's lives that produced resilience in the face of exposure to risk factors, that prevented risky behavior, and that promoted thriving or positive behaviors. Subsequently, as I mentioned, we've confirmed the importance of these 40 developmental assets through research with more than 3.5 million young people and young adults throughout the world. And we found that the developmental assets are relevant across populations. They matter for girls and boys. They matter across races and ethnicities. They matter regardless of a young person's socioeconomic status. So there's, regardless of religion, geography, they matter. And they're practical and actionable, which I think is very important, and very flexible, credible, and relevant, which is why the assets framework is now the most used framework of positive youth development around the world. And so we'll get into just briefly in this overview a little bit of what the assets are that illustrate some of those qualities. We divide the 40 individual assets into 8 categories and 2 broad domains, one of which is external. External assets are those developmental nutrients that are supplied by adults and peers, that is supplied by the environment. And internal assets are more of the values, skills, and self-perceptions that young people gradually develop as they become more self-regulating individuals within their families, their peer groups and communities, and so forth. Support, we look at support young people get from their families, their schools, their neighborhoods, how much their parents are involved in their schooling. Empowerment includes basic issues of physical and emotional safety, as well as the sense young people have that they are valued by the community they live in, they have opportunities to contribute. Boundaries and expectations are just that, rules that are set to help keep young people safe and healthy, and whether they have adult role models who set high standards, who believe that young people can achieve a lot and help them to do so. Constructive use of time, spending criterion levels of at least several hours a week in pursuit of creative arts, sports, other kinds of clubs and organizations, youth organizations, religious activity, and time at home with parents. Commitment to learning includes achievement, motivation, school engagement, bonding to school, positive values. I've alluded to several of those: of caring, equality, a sense of working for equality and social justice, a sense of responsibility, restraint from sexual activity and substance use while a teenager. Social competencies includes both interpersonal competencies like communication skills and cultural competencies dealing with people whose cultural background is different from one's own, which obviously is an increasingly critical skill, foundational skill in a global society. And positive identity, which includes traditional notions of self-esteem, but also senses of self-efficacy and a sense of purpose, developing a sense of purpose in life and a sense of a hopeful future. Very powerful developmental asset structure. And how the developmental assets work is in this slide. You can see well, something very odd has happened here with the heading. It's written backwards, but the heading in the actual figure is on the left is contexts, the different contexts that young people find themselves into. And the middle section is the person, and the final in the right-hand column, the heading for that is developmental success, represented here by reduction of ATOD behaviors and other risks, and promotion of thriving, such as succeeding in school, being able to overcome adversity, volunteering, that kind of thing. And what we see happening is that external developmental assets, the support, constructive use of time, boundaries and expectations, empowerment, experience in all of these settings helps to develop the internal values, skills, self-perceptions that lead to reduction of ATOD behaviors and promotion of thriving. But these also have reciprocal effects, so that we're really creating a positive cycle that recurs over time of building young people's assets, seeing those impact behaviors, both reducing negative outcomes and increasing positive outcomes, and then the outcomes increasing in turn the experience of positive assets in a kind of recurring cycle of positive development and growth. As I said, we've found consistently around the world, the more assets young people have, the better. They increase thriving, reduce risks, and greater resilience. And these findings are true across various diversities. We've recently found that in a study that focused on college and career readiness and the role of developmental assets, we found also that these relationships hold regardless of whether young people have a special education designation or not. The more assets special education students have, the better they do on measures of college and career readiness. It matters for whether people in our country, in the United States, are English language learners or not, whether they are proficient or limited in their English language. The more assets learners of English have, the better they do. So there's no group that we have found across all these diversities that doesn't benefit, where the youth don't benefit from more assets. Unfortunately, the challenge when we look at our most recent aggregate study of U.S. communities in 26 states, almost 100,000 young people in grades 6 through 12, we find that only 11% have 31 to 40 of those assets. That is an optimal level. 37% are adequate. They have 21 to 30. They could do better, but they're certainly better off than the remaining 52% who are either vulnerable or highly at risk. With the highly at risk, really, with 0 to 10 assets, this is a severely depleted environment that is not nourishing young people remotely in the way that they should be nourished. So that is the extent of our challenge in the U.S. and in more than a dozen countries now where we've looked at the state of assets. We find some countries that are on a par with this profile in the United States, some countries that are worse. We haven't found a country that's markedly better at this point. So this may represent about as good as, and this includes both developed and developing societies. So it's a clarion call that even in our developed societies, young people are really not getting the kind of positive nourishment that they need to avoid negative behaviors and to thrive, become the best person they are meant to be, and exercise their talents and their gifts in ways that help themselves and their society. Just to drive this home, we have just a couple more slides before we move on in the panel. Our research would, again, this is looking at the study, the aggregate study of nearly 100,000 youth, which is available on our Search Institute website. It shows the power of assets to protect young people from a variety of destructive behaviors. And you can see clearly that in every case, the percentage of young people who engage in these high-risk behaviors drops dramatically with each successive increase in the level of assets that they experience in their lives. Most dramatically, look at the difference in problem alcohol use and violence. 62% of young people engaging in violent acts against others in the previous year if they have 0 to 10 assets. Only 6% with 31 to 40. So there are two messages here, and the same parallel kinds of dramatic improvements, that even if you can only improve a young person's environment enough to bring him or her from 0 to 10 assets to 11 to 20, there's still a long way to go, but look at the dramatic improvement in the odds of their not engaging in destructive behaviors, even with that small an improvement, which still leaves them vulnerable, but not at the most highly at risk. It still leaves them vulnerable, but their vulnerability has been reduced by a very considerable amount. The other lesson from this, however, is that although the percentages of young people with high levels of assets who do engage in high-risk behavior is small, it's not zero. Even with a very, very nutritious environment, an asset-rich environment as we call it, some young people still engage in high-risk behaviors. So the assets are a good part of a total comprehensive solution, but the assets, just like any other approach, are not by themselves all that young people need. The other side of the coin, of course, is from risk reduction, is promotion of positive behaviors. And you can see the inverse relationship in these slides, the power of assets to promote positive behavior. Success in school is getting mostly A's. We use that because of grade inflation, at least in the United States, where a B average is no longer means what it did when I was young 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so we use getting mostly A's. It's not as difficult a standard to reach as one might think. But then, even there, dramatic differences. Valuing of racial and cultural diversity, wanting to get to know people of a different culture than one's own, maintaining good health habits and being a leader. All of these things increase with increased assets. And so finally, the keys to asset building that undergird all of this are really very simple. All young people need assets, not only those who are experiencing risk factors such as living in poverty, experiencing family distress of divorce or an incarcerated parent or an alcoholic parent. All young people need assets. Everyone can build assets. Professionals have a role and volunteers have a role in formal programs, but so do neighbors informally in how they treat young people and the opportunities that they give young people to feel like they're making a positive contribution to their neighborhood and that somebody cares about them as a person. Relationships are the key to building assets. Almost any program that you point to that has a success as a program, a positive program evaluation result, if you look closely, it's because the relationships between the young people and the adults in that program and the relationships among the young people who are in that program are positive and are constantly being the focus of that program. Little things add up. Sometimes we face major social problems and we have analysis paralysis, where they seem so overwhelming that there is almost nothing that an individual can do. No, an individual cannot do anything about preventing a country's problem with school dropout. An individual can do quite a lot with an individual youth about encouraging that young person, believing in him or her, and putting them on a path to better school success. And asset building is an ongoing process. It never ends. It's in this political season in the United States, we hear a lot about the term nation building. But asset building is really kind of an ongoing nation building because it's an investment in the most valuable resource any country has, which is its young people and who they are right now and who they're going to become and the society that they're going to build and lead in the end. So it's ongoing. It isn't just a curriculum that lasts for 6 weeks. It's forever. It's like being a parent. It's forever. And so those are the keys that we've learned through our program of research, and I think the other panelists will build on this and get deeper into the kinds of activities and facilitation and program structures that can work best in the specific focus on preventing substance abuse, and especially in school settings. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter, and you've set the stage just as I hoped. And so we'll move to Julie to look at the skills and the roles that people coming into that into the context, into the environment, into the ecology that Peter has described, and how do we the role of the change agent, and what are the skills that are needed. Julie?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. You know, I've been in this field so long, I remember when there were 30 assets. And then there were 40 through the research. And I just wanted to say that I think the field, profession of substance abuse prevention in the United States with the Affordable Care Act and other issues is actually broadening to health promotion, and I see a real relationship between health promotion and positive youth development. In fact, some of our language has changed from talking about domains to talking about context, which is what Peter was talking about with the 40 developmental assets. So I really appreciate the information. I've been aware and trained in 40 developmental assets and even learned something new here with this presentation. And I really believe in the promotion of the assets. So, but my role here is to talk about substance abuse prevention and where we are right now. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor, but also prevention specialist for 20 years in Texas, and I'm chairing the committee for the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium, the Prevention Committee, and we oversee the credential in all of our jurisdictions. I know there are about 45 states and 10 or so countries that have the prevention specialist credential. All of the United States Armed Forces have it. So we feel like the stepchild to the addiction field in terms of the attention that we get for promoting credentials. And one of the things I've been doing is looking at core competencies for substance abuse prevention specialists and what they are and what that means. And in the United States, our agency, SAMHSA, is looking at those and trying to develop some guidance for agencies and states and jurisdictions around what those core competencies are and what they should be. And so, the question is substance abuse prevention a field or is it a profession, and what constitutes a profession? And I would ask those of you who are already doing the work of substance abuse prevention, where you actually got your education for that, and I would assume you got it in workshops and seminars and conferences, and I don't know that very few people probably have a degree, an actual college degree in substance abuse prevention. I know there are addiction studies, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. So what is a profession? It actually occurs when the field develops some qualifications, some formal qualifications, and develops some education, agreed upon standards for an occupation, academic training, formal qualifications, standards are set, licensing authorities happen, and regulation happens, and education and certain blocks of information and knowledge is determined by the field. And then also we look at an ethical code of practice. Now our ethics, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is different from counselor ethics and our business ethics. We'll talk about that too. So what happens when we become a profession is it becomes a full-time occupation. I know a lot of people volunteer in substance abuse prevention or work part-time, but what we need to see, and if we're going to enhance it and raise it to a professional level, is full-time occupation. There are training and educational institutions are established with certain curriculum that are determined as standards for the field, and local and national associations are established. I know in Canada you have that. And then in the United States, state licensing laws are established, and this is because, well, let me just do this. We our major concern is protection of the public. So in the addiction field, we require counselors to have certain core competencies, certain knowledge, and certain standards of behavior to protect the public, because there's a certain level of risk to the public. In prevention, we are involved with individuals, families, communities, and we have children in our care, and too often we hear about abuse of children by people who are supposed to protect them. And so That's one thing that's so important. And then the second thing is that there is a specific body of knowledge that we need to have and possess as prevention specialists. And so our field, our profession, I need to change my language, my profession meets those in both cases. And so how do we ensure that those two standards are met? And, unless we have a vehicle to do that. And so certification is what we specialize in, of course, in ICNRC, and feel like that, you know, there should be some measure of competency, and there should be some way to demonstrate that there is that you've accepted and met some sort of criteria that the field has determined is necessary to practice. So that's why we look at and turn to certifications and licensure processes in this field. So the International Certification of Reciprocity Consortium, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about that. We started in 1981 when a couple of states in northern United States, I'm thinking Michigan and Wisconsin, may have decided that they wanted to, individual states were setting standards, but they wanted to be able to have some sort of reciprocity so that folks who moved across state lines would be able to carry their and be recognized with their license across the state lines. And so we have 7 different credentials. Don't ask me to name them. I might be able to come up with most of them, but this is, of course, the addiction counselor, the advanced counselor, the clinical supervision, prevention, criminal justice, and co-occurring disorders. I know that's another one. So that's who we certify and have credentials for. We have 76 member boards, over 45,000 certified professionals, 47 states and territories, 24 countries, Indian Health Services, and the United States Armed Forces. And basically what we do is bring together subject matter experts to set the standards for each of these fields. Now, for the prevention specialists, here are the standards that have been set, and I can talk about how this is done. In fact, we are in a new job task analysis process right now, and if you all are a certified prevention specialist or a behavioral health specialist of some sort, we would love to have you as one of our subject matter experts, and probably need to talk to Jeff Wilby about that, your board in Canada. So experience is 2,000 hours, which is 1 year of alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention work experience. Education, 100 hours of prevention-specific education. And we require 50 of that to be specific to alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And this is because we want folks to understand what they're trying to prevent, they need to know the disease concept of addiction, need to know how drugs affect the body, need to know how the family is affected by addiction. So those types of things about addiction theory and addiction processes need to be in our knowledge base. And then the other 50 hours is can be training in things like developmental assets, different curricula, community organizing, and different things that are specific to actual prevention. 6 hours must be prevention ethics. Because in our job task analysis, we determine what domains that a prevention specialist functions in, and those domains are different from, say, a medical model, a business model, and so our ethics are different. We deal with communities differently. We don't have clients in prevention. That's not in our language. The folks that we work with are our participants or our service recipients. So for those in the addiction field, it's kind of difficult, or counseling field, it's kind of difficult to make that switch in their brain that these folks are not our clients. Supervision, because we have 5 domains, and I'll talk about them. The supervision requirement is 120 hours specific to those domains. Then you must pass an exam which we are working, always updating, always adding updated questions to, and then sign the Code of Ethics, the Prevention Code of Ethics, and then recertification requirement. Now, let me just say this. States and jurisdictions may add to these requirements. Their state boards may do that. These are the lowest minimal basic requirements that ICNRC has. I hope you didn't hear that. And so, but states and jurisdictions may add to this. So if a state decides that they would like their folks to have a degree, if you'll notice in education there's not a requirement for a college degree, but a state certification board may add that. A state certification board may add more experience to this. And so this is, like I said, the minimum requirements, and I'll talk about Canada's requirements in just a second. Now, the other thing that states and jurisdictions do is they may add levels of prevention certification. In Texas, we have an intern level. It doesn't require the exam, but it requires these other things, because, and what that's for is to begin a career path toward becoming certified. And then it has this reciprocal level, which are these requirements. And then Texas also has added an advanced level. And the advanced level adds an education requirement and more experience requirement. And so this is sort of a way to provide a career path for people. Rhode Island has a supervisor level. And so different states and jurisdictions may add to their certification requirements. This is the one that's reciprocal, though. So if you, like the Texas intern level would not be reciprocal in any other jurisdiction. The one with these minimum requirements that you have here on the screen is the reciprocal level for all of our jurisdictions. And then the ethics piece, I think I talked about this. We use the Prevention Think Tank Code of Ethics. It's a recommended code of ethics, but jurisdictions don't have to use this one. If they have their own and they've written their own prevention code of ethics, they can certainly use that. The examination is about 3.5 hours. It's computer-based at this point, so we have testing centers. It's on demand. You may go you have to, of course, apply through your credentialing board in Canada and make an appointment to take the exam. But there's no specific time of year that you have to take it. Right now, these are the 5 domains. I put this slide in here because I wanted to show you that the 5 domains were determined by a job task analysis, surveys of subject matter experts and prevention specialists, and a very complicated statistical process that I don't understand. But our testing company does it for us. And so the domains that bubbled up from our last job task analysis in 2007 were these 5: planning and evaluation, education and skill development, community organization, public policy and environmental change, and professional growth and responsibility. We are in the midst, or the beginning process, of a brand new job task analysis, which we do every 5 to 7 years because the field changes and the demands change and our research and our knowledge changes. And so let me just go over what we think the changes will be for this next time, which won't be for another year. The exam won't be ready for another year on this new job task analysis, but we will keep planning and evaluation, prevention, education, and service delivery. So the education skill development has changed a little bit. We may have a fiscal accountability. We may have a communication domain. We still have community organizing, and we still have the other 2, public policy and environmental change, and then professional growth and responsibility. So that's our current exam. Why have a certification? We believe that if you're, if you're hanging out a shingle and you're proclaiming yourself to be in a certain profession, then you should be able to demonstrate that you've met the criteria for that field. that has been set by the field and the standards by the field. That's why we use subject matter experts and experienced prevention specialists to determine the job tasks analysis. And it also, of course, tells people that you work with and work for that you're competent. So we can't assume that anybody's competent. It needs to be measured and monitored, and all fields do this: medicine, psychology, social work, law. My manicurist has to have some sort of competency. She has a license. Your carpenter probably has a license. Firefighters, policemen. So it's not anything that's unusual for a profession to require some sort of competency and for that to be measured. The United States Accounting Office even says that it's a measurable human capacity that's required for certain types of performance in a field or in a skill. So it's important to be certified if you're working in the field, in the profession of substance abuse prevention, or even health promotion. It's a hallmark of the profession, and you actually receive recognition for that. I have a lady who's emailing me, do I really need to to be certified in the field? And I think it's a hallmark that says the level of your qualifications. You receive national and international recognition when you become certified through your Canadian board. You actually are internationally certified and can have a certificate that states that. You can move around with your certification because your certification moves with you. There's a process for applying for reciprocity to the board that you're moving into, but that's as long as you already have your certification, that's not a problem. And then it verifies, what type of skills that you already have, what knowledge base and core competencies that you have. So, but to me, the most important reasons are these. It enhances prevention services because it ensures public safety. We are involved with adults and institutions and children, and so we need to adopt and enforce prevention standards. We need to understand what it takes to protect children and communities and deliver ethical service delivery. But the other thing is, money's tight right now, and everything is evaluated, and so it's important that we utilize strategies and understand what makes effective prevention. And so we spend our taxpayer money on research-based and evidence-based and science-proven strategies that will deliver the outcomes that we're looking for. And then there's a benefit too, because you become a part of an international cadre of advocates for quality prevention services. The International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium is located in Harrisburg, PA, and actually I have the wrong email here. They've changed their website to internationalcredentialing.org. It's not ICRCODA any longer. It's even more complicated. It's internationalcredentialing.org. And then this is my information, contact information as well. I wanted to also let you know that in the effort and the progress that we're making in education for prevention science, there's actually a master's degree of prevention science available online at the University of Oklahoma. It's 33 hours. It is, a rigorous schedule, and but it is available. It's brand new, and so this helps us in our field to it helps us elevate to a profession because we do have that opportunity. So if you're interested, you can email me at this address, and I'll be glad to share with you, the links and the information about that. I wanted to take a look a little bit at Canada's specific requirements. You remember I said that each jurisdiction can customize or determine if they want more requirements or competencies than the basic or the minimum standards set by ICNRC. So this is what we have for Canada. This is the one that's reciprocal with other member boards, and the work experience is the same. Applicant has 2,000 hours of, now what this is, this has elaborated a little bit more. They say full-time or part-time experience in providing prevention services. And then this is a little bit more detailed on education. The ICNRC just states that you can have 120 hours of documented. Actually, ICNRC is 100 hours, so Canada has elevated to 120 hours of ATOD prevention within the domains, and 50 hours ATOD, that's the same. And then this is different, and this is added on to Canada. A minimum of 45 hours must be specific to multicultural or specific population awareness. And then the 6 hours of ethics training is the same. They must have supervised clinical training, 120 hours of practicum, which is the same as the ICNRC standard. And then these procedures, I'm sure there's the website, I don't have it here, to become certified and how to go through the process in Canada. And then the written exam, of course, is a requirement, and then recertification every 2 years with 40 hours of continuing education hours. This is 28 hours core addiction specific training. That is also added by the Canadian board. So I hope, I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm hoping that you people who work with kids and do this work are either already certified or have aspirations to be certified in substance abuse prevention. And I know Jeff will be, and I would be happy to answer any questions or help you through the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. And just to put a sort of a top line on this, it's very pleasing to see how disciplined approach we can take to the training of a person coming in to be a change agent in the environment that Peter was talking about. Our next presenter is Leslie White from the Council on Drug Abuse, and Leslie, I'm going to upload the slides that you just sent me, and we'll maybe you could start it out, and then I'll be able to add it right to the slides.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Doug. Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, everyone. At least it's afternoon in Toronto. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CODA Certified Education Program, and then I'm going to turn it over to Seth Fletcher, who's our program manager, and he is going to speak with you in terms of the learnings and how they're used by the professionals who take our program. So he'll speak to you about how the training is used, how professionals get started in schools, how they gain trust with youth, how they engage youth. Our program itself was born in an interesting way. We went through a complete program review with peers and staff and professionals from across the country, and redeveloped it, reformatted it, and then went about setting up a train-the-trainer program so that our educators, who are health promoters, health promotion intermediaries, so that they could be trained on delivering our program. And the more we got into it, the more we learned that there was an absolute gap in services and training available to health promotion intermediaries to learn and discuss, share information based out of best practices in youth substance abuse prevention, youth engagement, critical thinking strategies, that type of education. And so we went about expanding our program to become something open to the public. At the moment, the program is multi-phase, and it's available at no cost to participants. And my slides are going to tell you a little bit about that program. And I'm just going to skip forward a bit. There's some information about us that you can take a look at your leisure. The program, the CODA Certified Education Program, or the CCE as it's become known, it's an amazing program. A CODA Certified Educator is a health promoter. They have various academic backgrounds. The one thing that they have in common is that not only do they share a passion and dedication to prevent drug abuse, but they have experience in youth addictions in one way or another, whether it's in harm reduction or health promotion in general or prevention. They just share that one particular part of the field. They undergo extensive training in the fields of drug abuse. The program covers a variety of topics. At the moment, the program is accredited by CEEP, which is the continuing education body for Canadian pharmacists. And it's also the first Canadian program to be certified towards the International Certified Prevention Specialist and International Certified Alcohol Prevention Specialist certification through the CACCF, or the Canadian Addiction Counselors Certification Federation. The modules 1 and 2 of the online program, so that's where it begins, online, talks about CODA and who we are, and then focuses in on youth and drugs and talks about the reasons why youth use drugs and offers some healthy alternatives. Modules 2 through 21 are all drug-specific modules. Some of the drug topics that are covered in each of those modules are listed here, but we deal specifically with short-term effects of use, long-term effects of use. What does withdrawal look like? If there was an actual function when the drug was created in the first place, what is it? And these modules are constantly being updated. This information, again, is available to the public through our website at www.drugabuse.ca. In the drug files, which is an interactive database of drugs, and you can search through their proper name or through their Canadian street name. We talk about, is it legal? So we provide training on, quote, legal drugs like ginseng weed and salvia, as well as tobacco, alcohol, and caffeine. A drug is a drug in terms of our education. Module 22 of the online phase has been dedicated entirely to youth engagement. So we talk about tokenism and platitudes, and then we identify the 8 principles of youth engagement as defined by the Social Planning Council of Winnipeg, because we use those as foundations for all of our training, as well as the new standards that have been developed by the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse. There's a final exam at the end of the online phase. A grade of 75% is required to pass. It's a 2.5-hour, 250-question multiple choice exam. In the event that a student does not get a grade of 75%, they are entitled to 1 reattempt. If they fail at the reattempt, they need to begin at the beginning. Phase 2, or the interactive phase of the CCE program, is a full day of on-site interactive training, seminars, workshops, and discussion groups. The topics that we cover are in the classroom, youth engagement strategies, critical thinking strategies, and adolescent brain development. And we also talk a bit about CODA program delivery methods and offer some concrete examples. And the advanced modules of the program, which are only available to graduated CCEs, are new. They are targeting a specific audience, which you can see here is an Aboriginal audience. So we have developed working across cultures and cross-cultural counseling, cultural safety, working with Aboriginal youth, working with Aboriginal youth, the Inuit perspective, Aboriginal peoples and addictions, Aboriginal peoples and addictions, the Inuit perspective. And these advanced modules were developed in partnership with the National Native Addictions Partnership Foundation, or NAP. They are our partners in this project as well. Online program access, so some more information for you. You can go to our corporate website, which is drugabuse.ca. You can click on Become a CODA Educator, or the link at the top of the page that says Go Direct to CCE. So there's a little bit of information there, and it's written in a way that we're targeting health promotional intermediaries to become CODA certified educators and deliver our programs. those links on that website will take you to the second link on this slide, dakotaeducation.ca, which is the actual learning site. So that's where you'll see the online phase. You'll also find background information, required readings, and the final exams for the advanced modules and the interactive phase module. And then the last web address that I've put there, I put for your information. One of our key programs is our Youth Advisory Council, and this is their website. They're being the youth who are members of our Youth Advisory Council. This is yackers.ca is a web community where youth post articles, they blog. You'll also find our Crossroads video series, which Seth will talk to you about in a second briefly. But you will be able to watch some of the videos that our educators use when they're delivering our in-class education programs. So I turn it over to Seth Fletcher. He's the program manager with the Council on Drug Abuse, who's going to make some comments on the learnings and how the learnings of this program and how they're implemented.
This is Seth Fletcher from the Council on Drug Abuse. Thank you, Leslie. So I guess to begin, this program it's extremely beneficial, essentially as a training tool for our educators that go into schools across Canada and deal with drug prevention with youth. First off, it really allows us to establish a gold standard benchmark as far as the drug knowledge, whether it be pharmacology, physiology, a lot of drugs. So it enables us to ensure that in the classroom that we're putting in professionals that have achieved that standard. Secondly, in the interactive training portion of the CCE program, it talks about just different strategies of youth engagement, youth empowerment that we utilize in the classroom. So one of the key ingredients or key aspects of that is the catering to active learning styles in the classroom. So, for example, in our program, we conduct training to use in the classroom for our program that we deal with discussion. We use worksheets. We have our own set of videos that Dakota has produced called Crossroads series, which deals with real-life teenagers and testimonials of youth who have had interactions with drug use in that world. So it really helps develop quite a rapport with the youth. We have role plays in our program. We use artwork, activities, et cetera, and all these ways they really help us develop between our CCE and the youth just that general rapport. We try and promote a tolerant learning atmosphere by being non-judgmental. We encourage discussion, and we have we've got a real success with that approach. Our CCEs, they ostensibly are in the youth's life all the way from grade 7 all the way until they graduate high school, grade 12, because all of our CCEs are from communities in which they deliver their programs. So, for example, our program being delivered in Iqaluit, it was delivered by a person from there. So that, right off the bat, establishes a rapport with the youth that it isn't somebody, say, from Toronto or Vancouver or anywhere else in the country that's coming there to talk about their community, because it is their community. So there's that empowerment, that ownership that the youth feel right off the bat. Our program deals with the training of promoting protective factors. We talked a little bit about that earlier in the earlier presentation, but promoting protective factors, identifying and having a discussion about risk factors within their particular communities. And youth are empowered and engaged in those discussions to, establish for themselves, what are some risk factors that are in this community, and what are some protective factors that may be available to me as an individual or as to me as a member of this community. So all in all this adds up to resiliency promotion, and we're very proud that our program is showing examples of that. So again, ways that we engage the youth with regards to this program, the training is laid out, the framework is laid out to just cater to again all these active learning styles, and then our Youth Advisory Council, which Leslie pointed the website out, is just the sustaining piece after the drug prevention education, grade 7, 8, and at Sustaining Faces for Gappers, which is a group of students within the high school that continue to promote drug prevention in the community and within their school, using a lot of the key learnings that they have had discussed over the previous 3 years. Again, with the CCE program, coupled with the online phase, with pharmacology and youth engagement, and the interactive portion, the face-to-face training, talking about the engagement and the youth empowerment, it's really about gaining trust with youth. So, I mean, this engagement is just key, and it's just the backbone of our program. Just being able to go into the classroom and how to not be that talking head at the front of the classroom. How to meet you in the middle to say, you know what, here's some here's some information about drugs. Here's some facts. You know, here's some short-term effects and long-term effects. These are the withdrawal symptoms. I'm not telling you to use drugs. I'm not telling you not to use drugs. But with this information, I am giving you all, you know, the tools that you need to make healthy decisions for yourself. And when you have that sort of that toolkit at their disposal, they're more likely to make healthy decisions for themselves when they feel it isn't an adult standing at the front telling them what to and what not to do. So I guess at the core of our interactive training, that is the key message is that let's meet them halfway. Let's give them that toolkit. Let's put tools in their repertoire and then stand back and watch with amazement that they start to change their, you know, the attitudes towards the knowledge and attitude and behaviors towards drug use. I think that's about it. Turn that back to Leslie or to Doug.
Great, thank you very much, Seth, and really appreciate getting to the nitty-gritty here. We're going to have a comment from Joanne McQuiggan about the presentations thus far. Please, if you have questions or comment, please add them. Either speak up after Joanne has made her remarks, or just type in your question or comment into the chat box at the bottom left corner, and I'll read them out. Seth, Janet's made a suggestion about you're coming across a little garbled. If you can make sure you're quite close to your microphone when you're speaking, I think that will help. So, Joanne, I know you've been bounced in and out of the session here. It's probably due to the internet, the flow of data, but hopefully you've had the chance to listen in for most of the session. Do you want to add a couple of thoughts to the 3 excellent presentations we've had thus far? Trying to check to see if Joanne has been bounced out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, we're
okay, great. Sorry, I think mute was on my microphone, so sorry about that. Yes, I did lose my internet connection a couple of times, but I think I got back in fairly quickly, so heard most of what was going on. One of the things that strikes me is incredibly commendable that there are standards for the profession and design and certification and all of those pieces. And it strikes me as interesting to take it back to Peter's comment at the beginning, when we know that an asset framework or positive youth development framework is something that does work towards preventing those risky behaviors, and everyone can build assets and everyone should be and has a role to play in doing that. How do we reconcile that with where do we draw the line between what's a professional's responsibility? Because prevention work really needs to be beyond the role of the profession, while certain elements of it have to be defined by that professional role and should be delivered by certified people. How do we reconcile that for people and not let the rest of the population, so to speak, off the hook from the work related to substance abuse prevention? Because as parents, as teachers, as community members, we do all have a role to play in that. So it would be interesting to just get some feedback from our panelists around that as to how do we separate what is the professional's role and should only be done by a certified person as to what's everyone's role.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Comments from our panel members. And I guess it talks a little bit about to which pieces can be addressed by whom, making a little more general comment as well.
Well, this is Julie. I think that the role of the prevention professional is absolutely to support those volunteers, those community members, those neighbors who have to develop the relationships that Peter talked about with youth. You know, in a perfect world, the neighbor would be the one who developed the relationship, the caring, the safety, and provide those community-based developmental assets to children. And I think it's a role of the prevention professional to help guide, especially one that's in a community coalition, to help guide and empower and bring evidence-based strategies to those volunteers and those parents and those neighbors in the community. School-based prevention professionals are, you know, they have the children as a captive audience very often, and they're in their care, and they can also bring evidence-based strategies and empower teachers and parents who volunteer in the schools. But I see the professional as being the guide so that those two things happen that I talked about in the presentation. One is that the public is protected, and the strategies that are used will produce the outcomes that are funded to be produced, and then, you know, accountability for the grant money and for the money that's put in their care by whoever's the taxpayers. Actually, that's me. I'm a taxpayer, and I want my money to be used efficiently. So I think there's an oversight, a guiding responsibility of prevention professionals to provide accurate information to those volunteers, but absolutely church workers, neighbors, parents, and all are the most important prevention folks, because they actually have 24-hour access to the kids. So there's a
Peter
place
or Leslie, Seth.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
Peter.
I don't.
Oh, go ahead, Leslie.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I just only want, I completely agree with Julie's comments, and I would only add that I think the prevention specialist actually is in a unique position to do both, because apart from having the professional expertise in all the domains that Julie and Leslie and Seth talked about, they're also an adult, or in the case of a peer facilitator, a peer, who can provide the same kind of informal, caring, sense of valuing that young person. Those informal relationship experiences of being supported and valued, that neighbors and family and so-called, untrained, uncertified, non-certified, but caring adults can provide. So I think, while family and neighbors and folks at a church or religious institution or a Y can provide a great deal of the informal, the people with the additional certifications that we've been talking about here also have the expertise to not only provide those same kinds of relational experiences, but the wisdom and the knowledge about how specifically to work with young people who may already be engaging in risk behavior at a very dangerous level, knowledge of specific research and program ideas that obviously a layperson does not have. So a certified prevention specialist has a really a dual potential there.
Yes, I think that both of you really hit the nail on the head in terms of CODA and what we require from the people delivering our programs. We like to call ourselves a local solution to a local problem. So while we may have offices in various places in Canada, the person who is our CCE, who is the health promotion intermediary or the certified prevention specialist, they're from the local community. We've divvied the country up into regions. We call them school communities. So the adult ally who works with youth on the Youth Advisory Council, who delivers the in-class education, and who deals with other adults in the community, they're all from that community.
we have a principle in prevention that states local people solve local problems best. And
That's it.
so,
It's 100% right.
Right, and so I always tell people that nobody in Washington, D.C. is going to solve a problem in Cuero, Texas.
And they might have some information to give you to help you develop your solution, but they're not going to be the solution.
Exactly. And just an example, I lived next door to a family that had 7 children under the age of 7. And because of my knowledge of developmental assets, I knew and I realized, not because I was a prevention specialist, that it was important for me to develop a relationship with those kids and provide that safety and that interest in the community caring of the developmental assets. And so that's what I preach to people, not because you're a prevention professional, but you need to be, that protective factor, that resiliency factor to the kid that you see in the elevator, just interest. When's your birthday? What's your favorite subject in school? And develop a relationship. So Peter's right. Even though we are prevention specialists, it goes beyond that for us as a community member.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you all three to that question. Other comments or questions from participants? If you want to type into the chat box, I'm going to be commenting, and we're running a bit over time, so I'm going to look to close off the session in a couple of minutes. But I had one sort of comment based on the presentations and discussion thus far, and I really liked Peter's description of ecological approaches, or the ecology and nutrients, because in my experience, we need to be able to engage young people, and we need to guide them and to be in sync with what their needs are, and as Julie and Seth and Leslie have described. But we also need to be mindful of the environment around them, and that's not necessarily the focus for our conversations today. But there needs to be someone looking at that, looking at the habitat as well as the inhabitants of the habitat, and that's a real challenge, because that's a collective responsibility, but it also requires a different skill set. So we need to think about that, so that as we come in with CODA educators, or people like CODA educators, or if we engage student activity advisors in the school, or if we engage guidance counselors in the school, or if we engage parent volunteers in the school, each of those people can make a contribution. But looking at the whole and looking at the environment as a whole is very often challenging, because everybody only has one piece of it that they can influence. So that's probably another session. That's probably looking at the role of coordinating at different levels. But I was very pleased with that kind of ecological mindset that we look at, and then that enables people to focus in on a task that is meaningful and achievable for their particular role, be it professional or volunteer, within the environment. Final words from any of the panel members before we finish up, and Joanne, I'll also invite you to make any kind of other comment before we
finish up. Looks like Rachel has her hand up. I don't know if that's...
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it. Okay, go ahead. Rachel, if you wanted to... maybe just if she's come back.
Yes, she may be accidentally.
Come back in from being bumped off with the internet. Okay. Further comments, Peter?
Just thanks for being able to join the panel and all the participants today. Enjoyed it.
Great. I think a real good start. I invite people to go and take a look at the 2 paragraphs that we've written up as a way of capturing some of this conversation. One is looking at a CODA-type educator in terms of an external person who's been engaged by an agency or by a group like CODA to come into the school and to work with the school, sometimes directly with the youth and sometimes with the school overall. And then another person in the school is the student activity advisors, mostly in high schools, who can play a role in substance abuse prevention and youth development. And so there's other players as well. But if people could take the time to go and look at those two descriptions, they're only a paragraph long, and to use the wiki technology to leave a comment, or if you'd like to go in and edit that description, please do so. Our hope is that those brief descriptions can help to build a bit of a knowledge base, so that as we move forward in these discussions and in worldwide discussions, that we've got a bit of a shared understanding of the small nuts and bolts as they work towards a larger piece. So thank you again to our panel members and to Joanne for commenting. An excellent presentation. We'll be finishing up this session, and remind you that the next session is going to be on instruction, and we have some excellent presenters there looking at the instructional pieces to substance abuse prevention, and then moving on from there to other sessions on parent participation and so on. So please stay in touch through that participants list that we've developed, and we'll be looking forward to meeting you again here online very soon. Thanks again to everybody.